Good evening. I will now call the May 23rd, 2023 meeting of the Ben Lapine School Board of Directors to order. I would like to introduce our participants this evening. To my immediate left, Director Chadwick, Director McPherson Douglas, Director Montgomery, and Director Olson. To my immediate right, Superintendent Cook, Deputy Superintendent Nordquist, and Board Clerk Janet Bojanowski. I am Melissa Barnes-Delakia, Chair of the Board. We are joined by Aaron Trimble and Kayla Celadon tonight for ASL interpretation, and Spanish interpretation of the work session is being provided on the BLS School Board YouTube page. As always, click on the live. At this point, I will invite you to join me in standing, removing your hats, and saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll now go to the review of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda, Superintendent Cook?
There are no changes to the agenda. Thank you.
Great. Fellow board members, are there any changes to the agenda? No. Hearing no requests for changes, the agenda stands. A note for our stakeholders, we do not take public comment during our work sessions. This is an opportunity for the board to engage in key board work and initiatives. And tonight we will also be holding a public hearing for the 2023-24 budget. I will now move to district recognitions, and tonight we are joined with special guests, Wilda Caferata from the Oregon Natural Resources Education Fund grant. So Wilda, I will invite you up.
Well, the light is green, so it should work. Thank you very much for having us here at your board meeting. I know I'm a board member myself, so I know how busy you are, so I appreciate the chance to be on your agenda. So I'm here representing ONREF, which is Oregon Natural Resource Education Fund. And that sounds like a fund, and it is, but it's also a 501c3 organization with a board of directors and several advisors to that board. And I'm an advisor to the board for the Oregon Small Business Association, and my husband Steve is the advisor for the Society of American Foresters. There are 3 other funds besides our 2, and we're all under the umbrella of the Oregon Community Foundation. And ONREF was funded in 2001 and with a mission of enhancing and sustaining forestry education, natural resource education all over Oregon for high school students. And our funding comes from donations. It's all donations from the forest industry, from the Society of American Foresters, from the Oregon Small Business Association, and from private donors. And we all absolutely believe in the importance of natural resource education for Oregonians. You know, not so much, well, for appreciation of Oregon's forests for sure, and to care about them, but mostly, and also to learn the skills to care for them. You know, how to manage natural resources and how our students can learn how to do that. And so Steve will tell you more about how the grant process works, but we're really excited to be issuing a grant to Lapine Schools.
Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Caferetta, and I'm not only on the board, I'm a professional forester and have been for, 50 years or more. So been involved with forestry education most of that time. Within Oregon, there's 41 schools that are CTE accredited, and Lapine is one of those 41. There's also another 11 schools that are in the process of becoming CTE accredited. And then there's 30 more high schools across the state that have natural resource classes that they're teaching, but are not currently in line to become CTE accredited. When we started this ONREF fund, there were 8 schools in the state that had forestry programs. So the need has become a lot greater, and we don't only fund CTE accredited schools, but we also do funding for some of the schools that are trying to get established and to bring them along, and we've done quite a bit of that. We've I guess I wanted to first say that the total of the fund now is about $400,000. So it's grown quite a ways, and it's mostly come from small donors, but there have been some larger donations as well. And we still have established one. The Oregon Small Woodlands Association is our newest fund, and we've grown it to about $50,000. But the total of $400,000, we invest in grants about 4% every year under the supervision of the Oregon Community Foundation. And they professionally manage the funds for us. And so the plan is that sustains the fund, so we can do that every year. And then we try to grow the fund through donations that we go out to sort of a cadre of donors that donate almost every year, especially within the Society of American Foresters and then within the small woodland owners. That a lot of funding comes from them. Over time, we've made 79 grants for $136,000, and we think that that's probably touched about 48,000 students over time, figuring the grants typically last, we say on average about 7 years, because we're mostly buying things like tools and facilities similar to what this grant is for. So we're really pleased to have this grant for the La Pine School District and the logging skills facilities that they're building, which will not only benefit the students that are there that are participating in it, but the whole school that'll come and watch the sports. And I've been involved in the logging sports for a long time, not doing them, but as the scorekeeper and stuff like that. So, but the other thing that's really good about the La Pine facility will be that those schools from all over the state will come to compete, and so we'll reach even more students that way than we would have otherwise. So, and last, I would just say that your teacher there, Cameron, is known for his great work, and we heard all about his, and he wrote a terrific grant request. You could see his enthusiasm in the request, but we also had the state CTE person who is on our grant committee rave about his hard work and his leadership. So we think it's a very good investment. And I have here and since Cameron's not here, our principal.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
So thank you a lot. Oh, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Scott, you want to say a few words?
Sure. First of all, thank you. And also, it was nice sitting and talking with you, getting to meet you. But thank you for the support for our program. Most of what I was going to say, we just heard. But what I would add to it is just Cameron Salvatelli has done so much to start to rebuild this program. He's only been at the school for 5 or less years at this point. I'm going to go ahead and brag a little bit on the team too. Our team has 9 students on the team, which is small by standards, and we're just getting going. But we were just at state and we placed 3rd in state as a team. And for the 2nd competition in a row, we had the best overall logger. We're really proud of that. We're very excited about the Logging Sports Arena. When I walk the gates and the perimeter of the school, every day I go through there and I just watch it develop, and it's just getting me excited. And with a teacher like Cameron, I love anything that's under my authority to just be able to say yes, and anything that's not under my authority, I'll always just partner up with a teacher like Cameron and say, how can we get others to say yes? And this is a great example of it. And the only other thing I would add to those comments is it'll be good for the kids in the program, the whole school, but also for the LaPine community. We are really looking forward to the day next spring when the whole LaPine community will come out and come to logging sports competition on our campus. I'm really excited for that. And this will help that happen, so thank you. Thanks a lot.
I'll make a trip down to watch that too. I saw a logging sports competition in Waldport last 4th of July, and it was pretty intense. Thank you so much for your support of our schools and of LaPine High School and of our CTE track, because it's one of our 4 goal areas is making sure our kids have a passion, purpose, and plan for their future. And the CTE track with forestry and LaPine is absolutely part of that mission and vision. So thank you very much. All right. This is one of those special meetings where I get to say a lot of words and hit my gavel a bunch. So we are going to have a public hearing is what's happening. So we're going to leave our regular meeting, go to the public hearing for the budget. We will leave the public hearing for the budget and come back to our regular meeting. So at this time, we will recess the work session and call the budget hearing to order. This hearing is for the 2023-24 budget as approved by the Budget Committee on May 9th, 2023. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony from the public on the approved budget prior to the adoption by the Board of Directors. We did not have anybody request to provide testimony. Final board action on the 2023-24 budget is scheduled to take place at the June 20, 2023 meeting. With that said, there was information that came out at the state level late last night, about changes in the budget. So I'm going to ask my fellow board members if there is any points of clarification or questions we want to ask now of our team, or we can ask in June when it comes for our final ratification. But we can take any questions now if you have them.
Thank you. I do have a couple questions. My first one is, what would happen to this budget process if we were allocated more funds for the next biennium?
So it depends on the timing. There's some hiccups that stand currently in the process with the fact that we don't have a quorum right now in the legislature, and so there's a potential for a special session at some point. Once those allocations are made formally and voted upon and approved, there would likely be some form of probably a resolution that comes and does some adjustments to the budget, since we would be both increasing the allocations that we would receive and the costs that would likely increase. The cost would tend to go up based upon how we're bargaining in two agreements right now, both with our certified staff and with our classified staff. We anticipate that those costs are going to increase. As both of those go up, there would be some modifications to the budget, which we would bring back to you all probably in the form of a resolution. It's not crucial timing-wise, but as we match that up, that resolution would come before you, I would guess sometime early fall would be probably the earliest, I would guess. The budget process as we have it now going forward is sufficient for meeting the legal expectations of this board and for this community.
And for the public, can you tell us what that threshold is that the budget would go back to scratch?
Good. He knows he's coming up. Good. I know if it's a change of over 10% of the total general budget, we have to actually bring the budget committee back into the conversation. I'm not sure.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take it from there.
10% or higher increase in appropriations. We bring the budget committee back, get approval again, have another hearing to adopt that resolution, supplemental budget. Less than 10%, it goes to the board. We don't need to bring the budget committee back. So if we're above appropriations, it has to go through a resolution or a supplemental budget process.
So if it's less than 10%, the board gets to decide what we do with those additional funds
That's correct.
without the budget committee.
Less than 10%, it goes, and that's by fund, it goes to the board for approval.
I have another question, but it doesn't have to do with the increase in funds. Can I ask it? Oh, okay, great. Just getting clarification on that. One of the things that I've been anxious to receive is the information about the task force that was formed. And my hope had been that the recommendations for the task force would come in before we finalize that budget, because something that we had talked about was radical changes to what would happen. And when the educators had approached us, what I was told is things couldn't change this year. It was just too short of a time. So we would form the task force. And what I would be really disappointed in is that we wouldn't go back and say, actually, they can't even change next year. So before that budget is fully finalized, I wanted to see what those recommendations were, because could we incorporate that into the budget and make some changes?
Yeah, so we won't even be finished with bargaining by the time you all approve the budget. And so the costs that are likely to be allocated and some of the staffing, there's this up and down, that goes with, if we increase staffing, then if we increase our pay to staffing, then we're going to decrease the amount of staffing. The adjustment for new dollars and that apportionment is what we would be bringing to you all. And then the next steps are in that process of the task force. If they say, we know the answer to solve problem X is that we need more staffing Y, then we would make those adjustments in how those are being allocated. So we would maintain that flexibility through all through this whole process. That's the difference with what happened last year is all of those allocations were made and pushed out. We know we're in a position right now where we don't have determined costs yet, finalized costs on our certified staff or our classified staff. So we're in a position knowing we have to have some flexibility going forward as we build whatever those agreements are in both of those CBAs.
You gave me a lot of information. So if I ask a question and you're like, I just told you the answer, I'm so sorry. So if the recommendations come in and they say, short term, we would love an increase in staffing, like at the type of staffing, increase of staffing at the classroom level, do we have the flexibility to say we are going to roll back some programs in administrative staffing to make that happen? Do we have that kind of flexibility?
To roll back, that was a really specific question in that. So are you talking about specific to cutting administrators to?
Yeah, I'm offering that scenario.
Cutting administrators to increase staffing in schools you're looking at something that's this big of our portion of our budget to something that's this big of a portion of our budget.
Yeah, it's just a scenario.
Yeah, but we would have some flexibility in how those things would go, absolutely.
Okay, so that doesn't need to be decided within the budget, that the budget can be decided saying this amount of funds is allocated towards staffing, but then we have flexibility later on to say, all right, we're adjusting where we're putting those funding
Correct.
within our staff. Okay,
Correct.
great,
Yep.
thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point in time? Okay.
Oh, one more, sorry. Okay, one more question, and I'm almost certain you told me this, and I'm embarrassed that I'm even asking this, but what did we allocate within our budget for the increase into the salary to our staff?
So the budget is built on a $9.9 billion funding model. And at that model, we could allocate we could pay for all steps and lanes that would be acquired by staff and allocate a 2% pay increase across the board and accommodate that on the current budget.
And Steve, can you name what the percentages are for the steps and columns? Because that is in addition, it's 2.5% per,
Per step is about 2.5%, and I think it's
And
for
it's
column, it's 2.5%, and it's about another roughly 3%, I think. When you add them all together, is that right,
I think
Brian?
it's 4 to 5. I have it right here.
Sorry, what do you mean by steps? I know, just break it down,
Yep.
like,
So a column, when you look at our salary schedule, going from left to right, you move across the columns with more education, which also results in increased pay by about a 2.5% increase as you move across. Steps are down on the salary schedule. You gain a year of experience, allows you to move down, and that percentage is about,
It varies.
Yeah.
It's probably close to 3 to 4%, but not everybody gets it because they get to the bottom of that, and so they're stepped out.
the
So,
farther,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the farther you go to the left, the more steps we have also going down. It allows for increased experience. I think early in the salary schedule, at 7 or 8 years, you no longer receive those benefits. But as you move across, you get those for many more years.
Melissa, you're finding the number, yeah? Thank you. No, take your time. One more question. Is there a scenario that we don't get the approval for the increase of funds because of what's happening in the legislature with the delays, and they have to call a special session, and we're pretty confident it's going to pass in the special session? I mean, take that with a grain of salt. But we have to pass the budget this June. Could we anticipate the increase of funds so that we can increase the pay to our teachers, anticipating those funds? Teachers, I mean educators, anticipating the funds that would possibly come in the special session?
I think the answer to that is yes. The question on whether or not we would be done with negotiations prior to that is probably no. I think it's going to take some time to get through negotiations. And so that agreement will take probably, I would guess it would take longer. I was just talking with Sarah Barclay earlier today, and I'm guessing that we'll still be we haven't even started OSEA negotiations yet. And so the likelihood of having all of those things tied up before the session expires and a special session would take place is probably not high.
But doesn't the other need to come first? Don't we need to increase the budget before the bargaining finishes?
Not necessarily, yeah.
But wouldn't that be?
The
am I
budget
missing?
approval process is time-bound and statutorily bound
Yep.
and will happen at our next meeting. We would then continue negotiations based upon what we're being told from the state, based upon the appropriations model that we'd be getting from them. And so those things, all timing-wise, follow a typical process. And it's, sometimes negotiations take so long, we say, is it an increase in salary going from this point forward, or is it retroactive back to the beginning of the year? Those are on a basis by basis as negotiations go.
But wouldn't that negotiation change if we knew additional funds were coming in? Sorry.
Totally, yes. Yes, and I'm assuming, Sarah was very much aware that those funds had been stated to be allocated last night.
Bargaining assumptions are going to be based on the
On-
announcement from last night.
Got it.
even though
That's
it
what
won't
I
be
was looking
approved.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
And then I did pull up Brad Henry's, or Steve Herron's, the salary schedule index. And when individuals move horizontally, so from like BA to BA plus 15 to 30, it's a 2.5% increase. And then when they move vertically, which is their years of experience, it is 4.1 to 5.1% is they're moving in years of experience. So they've got those two pieces, and then there's the 2% on top of what they have built in as increases based on years of experience in education. And I can hand this down so you can see it. That's the index, and then you put in the number, whatever number it is that we land on, and then it populates all of them.
But it caps out at 16 years of
Yes.
experience and BA +1.
Why can't it continue? Like, why does it need to cap out?
I'm sorry?
Oh, why does the chart need to cap, like, why can't the increase continue as their years accumulate? Like, why does the chart need to end, is my question.
There's incentivized, financial incentivization to move across so that as people teach for many, many years, the idea is that getting some education as you continue your position is essentially professional development and growth. And so there's rationale to get people to move to the right in the salary schedule. So you move to the right by getting additional credits and taking classes and those kinds of things. Master's degrees.
Which also,
Why doesn't it go to
Why does
30
it stop
years?
at 16 years of experience? And also, I'd love to know what,
That's the agreed upon, that salary schedule is agreed upon by
Yeah,
BEA, and
that's-
that's,
part of the collective bargaining agreement that's been in place long since before you and I even got here. And so if that was to be a point of negotiations and we wanted to go that direction and the union wanted to go that direction, that's something that could be negotiated for sure.
the other issue is that recertification. So teachers don't get certified, forever. And so the recertification demands that they add hours or degrees or whatever. So there is, in essence, a built-in, not only an incentive, but a built-in requirement that they move across. So
I'd love to understand the approximate percentage or number of educators that are above 16 years of experience and therefore wouldn't be getting that annual increase versus below. Do you know that?
I think it's about 40% of our staff are in that farthest right column. Does that sound about right? Too
that
high?
sounds really high.
Okay.
What I would suggest is I feel like we're getting pretty far away from the 23-24 budget, especially since any discussion of salary schedule is actually a bargaining discussion. And so what I'd like to suggest is actually that we move out of our public hearing and that we reach out to Steve and Brad individually, and maybe we have a couple of different things to be able to provide back and have them provide us that information. But right now, it does not materially affect this budget. So that's the course of action that I would suggest.
Sounds good.
Okay. So at this time, we will close the budget hearing and call the May 23rd, 2023 work session back to order. All right. We are now going to go into a work session, and because we're using so much survey data across our different goals and measures, we will be joined by Dave Van Loo, Director of School Improvement, who's going to really run a workshop tonight as we look at the staff data from our Youth Truth Survey.
All right, good evening. Here we are again. This is the fourth iteration of the board ends discussion, I believe, this year. I'll just kind of talk while I'm waiting for the slide deck to show up. Oh, there we go. Perfect timing. So yeah, we covered ends 1 and 2. End 1 has to do with academics, and 2 has to do with the passion, purpose, and plan, future readiness. End 3, the belonging and wellness type of measure, we split that into 2. So we looked at families and students last time. The plan was going to be to look at staff through 2 lenses, through that the new like Oregon Educator Survey and Youth Truth, but unfortunately we don't have those data available to us. So we're going to focus solely on Youth Truth for tonight's. I don't know if it's a delay or if it's just because it's a new process, it takes a while to do. Like Youth Truth, I mean, this is what they do, so it's a turnaround of like 2 or 3 weeks but this is.
The website says that we'll have data available in June, but that's as close as they say right now.
So here are some demographic data that I pulled from the most recent at-a-glance report card. So on the right, it shows just the comparison between students and teachers for different racial ethnic groups. And then on the right, it's kind of a rough count of several different types of staff that we have. This is not inclusive of all staff, but so there's like 69 administrators, over 100 teachers, over 200 educational assistants, 63 counselors, 6 licensed librarians, and 15 psychologists. And there are other staff as well. This is kind of a lens on the more specific to academics and educational related positions. So into the data, these are the themes that staff were surveyed on, and you'll notice that a lot of these are similar to what the families and what students were asked about. So engagement, relationships, culture, school safety, and diversity, equity, inclusion would show up in some of the other surveys. The one that's unique to this group has to do with professional development and support. I'll just give you a moment to skim through these. And then just for your information and some context, this is a list of all of the Oregon school districts that participated in Youth Truth this year. So I think the list is about 24, 25 districts. The number on the far right is the number of schools that are involved in the survey. So there may be districts that don't survey all of their schools as part of this. So as you look at the list, you'll see that Bend Lapine is considerably bigger than most of these districts. Some of the other larger ones, North Clackamas is pretty similar in size to Bend Lapine. Gladstone is a Portland Metro district. Corvallis is a little bit bigger, McMinnville. And then you see that Jefferson County is a participant in this as well from our local region.
Dave, when we looked at Youth Truth previously, I don't remember seeing this list, and I thought all the comparisons were national. Are we now going to be comparing
So
to Oregon?
there's actually both. And when we've shown this before, we've actually, depending on the displays, it shows both national and comparisons to Oregon at the same time.
Okay.
So what we pulled out here are just a sampling of some of our key demographic groups. There's obviously many more groups than are represented here, but this shows a table of gender, persons of color, type of staff, either instructional or support staff, and then LGBTQ+. So that's all broken out by elementary and middle and high school. Those are all separate survey analyses in Youth Truth. So over on the left, you can see elementary 600 staff completed this, middle school over 300, high school over 400 for about 1365 total participation. It kind of works out to about 100 staff per grade at each level. A couple of things that I think is worth pointing out here is one, the prefer not to say group. Again, this was something that we noticed with the family survey as well. Like students were really forthcoming and had no issues identifying what groups they saw themselves as part of. Families were a little bit more reticent to do that. And we see that with staff as well. It's pretty common to see 15 to 20, 25% of staff choosing to not identify into one of these groups. So that's just something we need to keep in mind as we look at the data. And the other thing that's really stark here is the gender differences at between elementary and middle and high school. You can see how few male staff we have at elementary schools compared to how many we have at the secondary level. But that's not necessarily a surprise, it just makes it evident. So here's a summary of the last 2 years of data, and what you'll notice is the highest rated themes for staff are really congruent with what students had to say and what families had to say. Again, relationships and culture are the things that Ben Lapine tends to do really well relative to the other things that are measured on the survey. So that's the same story here. In terms of the lowest rated themes, you'll notice that it's professional development and it's school safety pretty consistently. So here's an overview of all of the different themes by all of the different grade levels. So you've got elementary on the left and you have high school over on the right. A couple of things that you'll see in this, again, if we think about typical or average being about the middle 50%, like from the 25th percentile nationally to the 74th percentile nationally, what you see here is for every level, for every theme, we are in that average or typical range. So there's nothing that's abnormally high or abnormally low. So what we see in this is we are very typical compared to a lot of other districts. The other thing that you'll notice, and this gets back to the Oregon schools question, the gray bar that you see, the gray line you see with the tick mark below the orange bar, that's the comparison between us and all of the other Oregon schools. So if you look at engagement, for elementary, we're at the 48th percentile nationally, but you can see that we are higher than other Oregon schools. And so when you look at these data, the general trend you'll see, besides that we are in the typical range nationally, is that we are mostly ahead of the other Oregon districts in this. For the majority of these measures, our ratings tend to be higher than what the Oregon median would be.
Can I go back just for a second, Dave?
Sure.
That 1,362 staff, can you give us just a percentage of staff that actually returned the survey?
I don't have that off the top of my head. It was I would say it's in the 80 and 90% range.
That's what I'm thinking, which is pretty significant. So our request for staff to complete the survey, I think did make some difference. I don't know what it was the year before, if it was less in terms of numbers participating.
My recollection is that we've generally gotten really good returns from students and from staff. I mean, they're a little bit more of a captive audience in our system, and families are a much tougher nut to crack in terms of getting surveys completed. And that's why if you're getting 30% from families, you're actually doing quite well relative to what tends to
Thank you.
happen
And
nationally.
Shirley, we asked administrators to set aside time, like at a staff meeting or something for staff. We really wanted to get staff feedback on this and on the Oregon Educator Survey as well.
So here's a little bit different view of the same data. So again, this is summarizing the overall themes, but we're looking at the percent positive ratings. So Youth Truth is a Likert scale 1 to 5, and 4s and 5 are considered positive ratings, 1s and 2 are considered negatives. So the way you would read this is, again, let's stick with elementary engagement. You can see 78% of staff answered 4s or 5s to this theme, essentially. So, and what the color coding tells us is that is in the second quartile compared to where other districts are at nationally. So 78% of staff reporting 4s or 5s on engagement is somewhere between the 25th and 49th percentile nationally. So when you look at these colors, you will see that, again, we're pretty typical. Everything is either in the second quartile or the third quartile, going up to the 74th percentile. The other thing that we can see from this is the percent change relative to last year. So engagement at elementary was 5 percentage points lower than it was last year. You can see that, like professional development and support for elementary was actually 6 points higher than it was last year. So you can kind of see short-term trends in this. And what you see from this overall, the greatest decrease over time is in the school safety range.
Were you able to see whether these types of percentage changes from last year to this year were indicative of other districts as well across Oregon?
I actually don't have access to specific district data for in any other districts. The one thing that I can say is actually,
I'm almost thinking like that Oregon on the previous, where we had the average percentiles, if those went down for all, in general in Oregon.
so yeah, I can see if I can find that. I don't have that right now. But in terms of trends, again, these are all the same data for our district. Again, it's elementary and middle and high school working from left to right. And you can see very clearly for the core themes, engagement, relationships, culture, PD, and safety, the themes are trending downwards. So ratings tend to be lower than they were last year and lower than they were 2 years ago. And then you see the opposite thing happening with diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we have a pretty clear upward trend there. So one little bit of context I think I can give is with the elementary school safety, which was our overall lowest, if I go back here, that's the 26th percentile, that's the lowest thing anywhere on this page. What our Youth Truth representative has told me is that's a national trend. It's like that measure is down everywhere. So, but yeah, I don't have that specific to any one district or to Oregon in general.
Can I ask you a question about when you're looking at historicals? Does Youth Truth only compare the liked items from the historical survey and the current survey?
So I don't believe any of the survey items have changed in the 3 years that we've been doing it. The core survey items haven't changed. I mean, we've done some of the additional add-ons. We used a different one this year than last year. So if that happens, we wouldn't get a comparison essentially for that.
Can you remind me of the question around school safety?
So there's several questions, and so I shared copies of them with the board previously. There's probably 4 or 5 different questions that would pertain to school safety. And so what they do is they will aggregate all of those results, and that becomes the overall theme score for school safety. So it's not just one measure.
think of like just a couple questions, or it's okay if you're like, nope?
No, I don't even want to
that's all
try.
right.
There's so many questions on the survey, yeah.
okay.
So I wouldn't want to get it wrong. But, so one thing that's really cool about the way Youth Truth does their survey, this is the first question that staff sees. It's, what do you like most about your school? It's a multiple choice question with 7 items, and I'll let you read through what these items are. And what they do is staff will choose one of these, and then at the end of the survey, they give them an open response option for comments. So it's like, at the end of the survey, they'll see, so you said that the thing that you like most about your school is that, for example, my administrators are friendly and supportive. Tell us more about that. And then it gives staff an opportunity to expand on that after they've gone through the whole survey and seen all the different questions. So what I did is I broke down, these are the themes for this strength, the strength comments, or the strength multiple choice. And you can see it breaks out pretty cleanly into 3 different groups. The yellow are the areas that staff are very clear, again, relative to these are not a strength. And I want to be careful here. I don't want to convey that that means you're doing bad, because again, remember, everything on this, we were in the typical range. So it's more like, where are these relative to everything else that we're looking at? So if you're the lowest ones doesn't mean you're terrible, and the best ones doesn't mean you're great. It's a relative difference for how you're doing. But for this, staff were unlikely to say that PD or supplies and facilities are the thing that's best about their school. And what they were likely to say was that, again, this, whether it's the empowerment or friendly administration or relationships, again, that culture, climate realm, those were big strengths. And frankly, I don't think there's much we can do with the other and the nothing. The other, it's a mix of dozens and dozens of different ideas. But the second question that they see on the survey
I'm
is
sorry,
this.
can you tell us individual empowerment? Like, what does that mean?
Oh, so that
What's
is
that
going
bucket?
to, let me back up here. If you look at the second bullet, like my work at this school gives me a feeling of personal accomplishment, that's the one that it's referring back to. It's just kind of a shorthand terminology that Youth Truth uses. So the second question is kind of the inverse of the strengths. It's like, what is the one area in which your school could improve? And the general themes here are the same ideas that were tapped into in that first question. And then we can look at the results of that and again, see how many staff and what % of staff identified each of these as areas for improvement. And not surprisingly, the areas that were not strengths tend to be the greatest areas for improvement, and the areas that were strengths tend to be the areas that are not the areas for the greatest area of improvement. One thing I think is worth noting here is when they're asking for what needs to improve at your schools, what is that, 45% of staff said other or nothing, which is a really high number compared, if you think back to the previous table, it was about 10 or 11%. So that's generally a good sign that people had a much easier time identifying strengths in their schools than they did with where do we need to improve.
I have a question about these questions. If you go in the surveys, it shows that they have concerns about school safety, right? But then we go into these next set of questions where they're pretty much feeding them, like, these are your only choices with strengths in ways to improve, things that need to improve at your school, but there's none specifically about school safety. And I go back to that conversation that we've had with the teachers about disruptive learners and how they feel unsafe in the classroom. So how does, other than that school safety piece, which we're seeing there, and which we know is not just a district issue or a statewide issue, this is happening across the nation, so it seems like it's reflective of all that. And then we see these really tailored, specific questions that sort of point them in, these are your only buckets that you can choose from. And my fear is, because I mean, we had the reading and we're focused on professional development, that we're focused on an area, but really one of the issues that we've been told over and over is spoken about in the data, and that's in the school safety piece, but it's not in this piece.
To your point, I mean, 303 comments are categorized in other. Like, do we get to read these comments, or like?
I've read an awful lot of these comments, yeah.
Did safety come up in that other?
Safety came up, and again, a number of other things came up as well. So I guess I can't speak to exactly the rationale of why Youth Truth built this survey the way that they did. I'm sure there was intention to it. That generally there's loose ties to the overall themes, but it's not a one-to-one correlation exactly to these are the themes that are measured on the survey.
I think I heard two specific questions that I'd love to have an answer to. One is, can we see all of the comments from all of the teachers for all of these categories? And two is, could we get a somewhat quantitative breakdown of the other category?
And I would add the third of
Or just
being able to
category.
see the graph of Oregon. We see that 2-year decline except for in DEI where we went up, but being able to see if that's what Oregon is seeing as well.
Just writing these down.
I'm also, part of the reason I'm wanting to see the comments is that like supplies and facilities are really different. So it's just hard to really get a sense from this slide about what our teachers are really concerned about.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But as you can see, it's 1,000 comments here. So yeah, we certainly have the comments, and we can talk about what's the most appropriate way to share those. There's certainly potential confidentiality types of issues based on what the comments are. So we might need to talk through some of those types of issues because the data, yeah, we don't know how sensitive every data point is, so we need to make sure we do due diligence on that. But yeah, we can certainly look into breaking down the other items and kind of see how things break out there.
I think, so another, oh, sorry, I probably had that on this whole time. I think one of the other things that I just have concerns about, and I probably shouldn't because these people are professional and they've designed this in a very thoughtful way, but when you assign a number to a category, or I mean, to a question, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not, you're only assigning a number on that scale for that particular question, but say like school safety, like I feel like a 2, it's not equivalent probably to the same 2 in, do you have the supplies that you need, right? Like it could be 2, yeah, I feel a 2 about it, but how strongly they feel about those 2s isn't reflective in here. And so that goes with professional development and school safety. They might be like, yeah, I need more PD, absolutely. And then when they ask another set of questions about what are ways that we can improve, and they've pinpointed PD but not safety, it just further solidifies us down a path when there was no option to know the strength of their feelings because they don't equate to one another.
So I think the way I would answer that is you cannot compare 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s across the different questions and across the different themes. And that's the reason they report all of these as percentile ranks, so you can see where you are relative to where other schools and districts are. because what that's capturing are the means and the standard deviations and the spread, like what everyone's data looks like, kind of the shape of the data. So you're able to make some comparisons when you're talking about percentiles, but to say, like the 50th percentile for engagement might be a 4.2 and the 50th percentile for school safety might be a 2.2. So yeah, you can't use the numbers that way. That's why they normalize it using that scale.
And I think it's important to remember that we're talking about perception versus hard data that describes the conditions of the actual circumstances, whether we're talking about supplies or safety or it's perceptions. The whole purpose of this is to dig into the hearts and minds of our staff and say, what are they feeling about these categories? And then what does that information tell us about the initiatives that we need to improve upon so that we're creating a better dynamic for our employees?
And I just forwarded the questions to everybody, so they're at the top of your inbox. Yes, yes, it is.
Dave, when they give you these results, do they give you, like, what kind of form is it? Like, can you, like, click on, I don't know, unfavorable responses and see what comments were given from those people who responded unfavorably?
So most of the data, all of the data that are not comments it's a web page, it's a web-based application, web-based reporting system that you just have the ability to look at different measures in different ways and then drill down into some specifics. Comments are completely separate from that. Comments, we basically look at, that's its own separate list or download that we look at that is completely separated from the specifics of the questions.
Dave, if you recall, we asked about the student and family Youth Truth data and whether or not it was available school by school to the school. And the answer, I think, was yes. Is that also true with the staff data?
Yeah, so by default, every school principal gets access to their school's data. And every principal will be able to see where their school is compared to other schools in the district. But I believe the other schools in the district are masked. So for example, if I'm the principal at Cascade, I will see where all of the other middle schools are, but my default report won't show which one is High Desert, which one is Pacific Crest, which one is Pilot Butte. So they do get school level data, but there's a little bit of confidentiality built into the system that way.
Sorry, I think people are taking a look at page 39, which is where the staff survey questions are.
I think related to that question, I believe when we were looking at the student results and asked that question, you indicated that the spread, the difference between schools was fairly high, showing that part of what we needed to work on was consistency. Was it similar for staff, or was the results across schools more close?
Again, it's a hard question to answer. Yes and yes, you see everything because again, there's so many questions. The overall trend I would say that we see is you see more consistency and tighter spreads among staff than you do among students and among families. But when you ask that many questions and that many different themes at that many different levels with that many different groups, you do see some differences that can start to emerge as well.
We're just noting that there are significantly fewer questions about school safety for staff than there are for students.
How many questions are there?
4 for staff, and it looked like about 12 for students. Yeah, for staff about school safety.
They're all very different. The one that I would love to know more about is the last fourth one. It says, "I feel safe from harm during school."
Okay. Are we okay moving on to the next part of Dave's? Our workshop? Okay, let's go into the text-centered discussion.
All right. So yeah, as was noted, one of the areas that has come up as an area for improvement for the last 3 years has been around professional development. And so that was the pre-reading that was assigned as well, is like, what does the research say around what works in terms of really effective professional development in schools? So what I'm actually going to give you here is a sampling of several staff comments. So these are the comments that I believe you have a paper copy of. And when you did the reading, you did a 3-2-1 type of document looking for what are some really key ideas and key questions and things that you see in the text. So what I would ask you to do here is take about 5 minutes, and we'll start with 5 minutes and see if you need more time. But to compare, what do you see in the text with what staff are telling us in these comments? And let me be really clear, this is a sampling of the comments. I tried to pick a bunch of comments that were representative of what staff had to say, but there's certainly others that wouldn't fit on the slide. So just think about questions like what agreements or what do you see between the comments and the text? What disagreements or incongruence might you see? And questions such as that. So, and then you'll have a chance to have a discussion and share what you see. So I'll just set a timer, I guess, for 5 minutes, and then I'll check back in and see where people are at. Yep. So go ahead and compare the comments to what you pulled from the text. Would people like any more time or feel prepared? All right, so yeah, the reason we chose this is, again, in part because we actually have comments for this that are coded directly by PD. And again, if we go back, if you think back to the kind of the summary slide, PD was the lowest measure for our district relative to everything else. At elementary, school safety was lower than PD, but at the other levels, PD was actually lower than what school safety was. So it seemed like a productive place to think about what's the alignment between research and some of the comments that we're getting from our staff. So I'd love to hear what thoughts you all have.
I will say, well, first I want to invite Dr. Nordquist and Dr. Cook to join in the discussion as well. But I think that there were a lot of parallels that I saw. And my proximity, see me using proximity. So I saw a lot of parallels in there, you know, and I think that one of the things from the article that jumped out at me was that when professional development is in the top quartile in terms of how strong it is, it's a 38% increase in effectiveness, which is equivalent to about 3 to 4 years of on-the-job teaching experience. And so the need, you know, the importance of having high-quality professional development, I think can't be understated as a lever. But I think that, you know, and so I saw that in, you know, people talking about, I always want to get better. As a lifelong learner, as a teacher, I'm always getting better. But the key thing that jumped out at me from this article and from the comments is the idea that we're focusing, that there's so much focus on the content knowledge in professional development rather than the on-the-go implementing that content and actively using formative assessment, check-ins to differentiate instruction for learners and differentiate. And so, you know, I saw not enough time to integrate practices. I want to increase my skills at differentiation, but really one of them was right there. So we learn a lot about the required curriculum, but not much, if any, on strategies to improve engagement and instruction.
Yeah, building on that, I think my sort of theme from the staff comments is that we don't necessarily need more PD, we need better and different. And I think one section of the reading that really, I thought was really powerful to just understanding how hard it is and where we might need to focus on more and different was this description of the author saying after 30 years of, you know, observing and being in classrooms, I've concluded that classroom teaching, particularly at the elementary and secondary levels, is the most demanding, subtle, nuanced, and frightening activity that our species has ever invented. In fact, when I compared the complexity of teaching with the much more highly rewarded profession of doing medicine, I concluded that the only time medicine ever approaches the complexity of an average day for a classroom teacher is in an emergency room during a natural disaster, when 30 patients want your attention at the same time. Only then do you approach the complexity of the average classroom on an average day. And goes on to just say, because classrooms are such complex places, there really isn't time to think. Teaching involves continually making snap judgments about what to do next in the moment with 30 kids or more. And it was just such an interesting conversation about the change management required not to learn new information about PD, which is what so much PD does, but to actually help teachers know how to change their behavior in those thousands of moments during the day. And my inclination from reading these comments is that our PD is probably more focused on learning new knowledge and not changing the teaching practice behaviors in those moments.
Yeah, and I would offer that that is pretty typical of most schools. It's not a, certainly not a unique. to
Not unique to
Bellarmine,
us.
but it's very interesting.
Yeah, the comments talking about that they wanted their PD to be more meaningful was very reflective in these comments. And as I was reading through the article, one of the things that stood out to me was, so they were talking about this like structured meeting, right, about this PD that would happen. But then do we have the time throughout the week that the teachers can actually think about, reflect, and integrate those practices into their classroom? So that's something I always worry about with educators, right? They go into the PD and then it's right back into the classroom. And do they have enough prep time to really reflect upon it, come up with a plan to integrate it? Because I looked at that like structured plan and they're like 15 minutes to chat about it and come up with a plan. And I was like, I'm gonna need a little more time than that, I think. But as we talk about doing something like this and shifting more towards integrating these practices, that time piece always comes back to me because that's something I consistently hear from teachers. I just don't have the time. So anyways, I just wanted to put that out there.
I took a look at 3 different important ideas and then kind of matched those 3 ideas to the comments. Actually, I was disappointed that my 3rd important idea is to develop an expectation that teachers meet regularly. It's part of the job. It should be in the contract. They need a structured conversation and they need time to do it. That's my staff development stuff coming through loud and clear. There were 4 comments that I thought reflected that. And I would hope there'd be more, but I understand and I agree that changing classroom habits is extremely difficult. And the minute you learn something new and you start thinking about how am I going to implement that, that is not a one-person conversation. So the idea of not only time, but it's teachers helping teachers. And I have to tell you that there was a significant part in the reading about coaches. And we have found a very nice way of identifying some very special teachers that are helping to teach other teachers. There is some fear, though, that one of the quotes on the page 78 and 79 is that good coaches are hard to find. Coaching is vulnerable to changes in funding. It's one of those places like at the elementary level. So if you can't, if you really are strapped, then you lose the music and the art teacher, right? And that's kind of the same situation that comment put it in for me. And that if coaches stay coaches too long, they kind of lose their classroom credibility. And I have found that to be true in practice. It's just like many teachers forget that our administrators have been teachers. They've been in the classroom. They know what it's like. And they know what they're looking for in most cases in terms of effective teaching. So it's just a reminder that professional development has to be not just geared to changing classroom habits, but it needs to have some basis. And we have done a really nice job, I think, of asking for data to support all of our board goals. And similarly, a teacher needs some data about whether or not the kids are really learning what they want them to learn, and then have a chance to talk about that and work on that. And of course, the whole idea of differentiating to meet student needs. Boy, we all say that, but we know what it's like if we've been in the classroom when you've got kids in a full range of skills, abilities, and experience. So to make that instruction meet every kid's needs is the huge challenge. But there are good strategies that will help us do that. And something as simple as, I'm going to give an example of what I'm talking about. Something as simple as taking a popsicle stick and for each kid, putting their name on it, putting them in a cup. And when you ask a question in the classroom, you don't wait for the smart kid to go, I know. You pull a popsicle stick and you ask that kid the question and you lay it aside. And if they don't answer, you pull another one. And by the end of the day, your goal is to have that one-on-one conversation in questions and answers, or at least comments for every kid in your classroom. Easy strategy. Love to see things like that. I have experienced a teacher that has magnets for every kid. And when she talks to that kid individually, she takes the magnet off the board so that her goal, every class period, she's a secondary teacher, every class period was to have all magnets with all the kids' names in that class off the board. So, there are some things that are, what was the word they used? Any teacher can use, some of those strategies. And I see in this an eagerness to learn in their comments and a commitment that they would like to and that they want to, but they're not even sure what it is they don't know. So sorry for that speech, but this has been my life for about 25 years, so I get kind of excited about that.
No, actually, what you said marries really well with Carrie's comment about what you're saying is teachers need something simple, and what Carrie's saying is that classrooms are so insanely complex that, and you're reacting all the time, it's you've got to habituate and make automatic these simple little things that you can do, because if we ask teachers to do things that are just too complex, their cognitive load is just going to go through the roof, and they can't do it. It's just not possible.
I think I also just really walked away from this article thinking again, it really reiterated research that has been around for quite a while. I know I feel like I date myself, but DeFore, Ecker, Schmoker, it was the same thing. It's have a professional learning community, you have collective genius in your building, create the conditions so that teachers can come together, that they can take an input, they can apply it together, they have a set agenda that they're using common assessments. And we don't know as a board what's happening in professional development, quite honestly, but it did make me think about Linda and the math work, and she was talking about math lesson study with her group. And so it's to what degree are those types of practices that we know move practice and move kids happening, and how do we do those? I had a little bit of a cognitive, one of the people said, I want more experts. And I know for myself as a school leader and district leader, that was always a tension, because you want to empower teachers to be able to really be working together and leveraging their collective genius.
One of the things that we've been collaboratively talking about with our educators is simplifying, so that focus becomes tighter and gives a better opportunity to dial in on those things that are going to be high impact strategies for right now. We've talked about simplifying the evaluation process so that it removes some of the burden on administrators, so that the relationship between an evaluator and teacher isn't always focused on the evaluation, but much of it can be focused on coaching. And tightening up what those expectations are, not so that it's harder, but that what we can focus on what it is that we're looking for is another aspect of how we can utilize professional learning communities to leverage these changes. The second thing that resonated with me on the article and how the article brings us, there's a level, there's somewhat of a hierarchy of needs that happen in a classroom, and that the first one is you've got to be able to manage the classroom starting foundationally. Management of the classroom, then you have to have what you're going to teach figured out and know what that's going to be. And those, so much of what we're working through with many of our educators are kind of crisis tyranny of the urgency. I love that in the comments of making sure that management is available as a starting place, and then making sure they know what they want. And many of our educators are telling us, I got both of those down. I want to work on how my instruction can be improved. And if you think hierarchical in those fashions, and I don't know that it's fair. I would love to have a debate about whether or not those things are top down or bottom up. I can tell you that if you don't have good teaching strategies, you can still manage a classroom, but if you can't manage a classroom, it doesn't matter how good your teaching strategies are. But making sure there's fluidity so that what we are teaching, we are very explicit how we're teaching it, and then knowing whether or not students are learning it. That's what came directly out of the article, and simplifying that so that the demand and the load that we have on administrators is reduced so that coaching can be more of their role. We spend a tremendous amount of time working with our building administrators and evaluating their instructional leadership so that the folks that are giving that feedback to teachers are the ones that are changing the work that we need. And we did how many interviews today? 6 or 7? Seven assistant principal positions interviews today, looking for more instructional leadership to drive that work.
I'll just add that when I look at the set of comments that we were given here, I see teachers who are engaged and also want to be enabled and empowered. And I think, they all go together. But I think the enablement piece and I guess empower piece has to do with time. I think the quality of PD also fits in the engage component. But overall, I just feel like there's this call to be enabled. Yeah, I'll stop there.
How much do we use either substitutes or different staffing structures to allow coaching and PD to happen in the classroom in real time?
That's a great
during the school
question,
day?
Carrie. And of course, last year, very little because of the shortage of substitutes. But now, the ESD working in partnerships with all the districts, I'm not speaking about Fridays in the spring, but in general, our substitute situation has become far better. And I would talk about several ways that I see substitutes being used really effectively to support professional development. One, that's the primary model that our coaches use when they work in schools. That'll be like the first grade team, we're getting subs for 2 hours for the first grade team. We're gonna be in Mr. Schmedlap's class working on partner talk or something like that. Or Melissa, you mentioned Math Studio work that we're pulling together all the Mountain View High School math teachers together to spend a whole day in lesson study. We're going to model a lesson in the classroom, debrief it. We're really focused on selection of student work, how you advance students' thinking by which student work you review or something like that. We also use it extensively. Principals try to buy time, so there isn't enough time. We agree totally, and I think it's a flaw in the American model of education that we don't see in other places in the world. But that's true in the United States. But they'll buy, say, like 4 subs for a day or even for a couple days. And at the elementary school, you might see the kindergarten team has a half day to plan. The first grade team has a half day to plan. Or at the secondary level, it might be by departments, just to give them a block of time to try to do more of this collaborative work.
That all sounds really good. The one thing I didn't hear in there was helping the teacher in real time in their classroom. Yeah.
When the coaches are working with teams, they're in class. Now, they might not all, they wouldn't necessarily be in a certain visit in all 4 classrooms, but it would be in one of the classrooms and, you know, the teacher's getting real-time feedback. With the number of coaches we have, one-to-one work with a teacher does not happen that often. It's a wonderful thing to do. It's just with 900 teachers and a dozen coaches, you know, you can imagine that that can't happen that often. It's most often with a group, but it's in classrooms with kids in there.
Yeah, I think just thinking about, like, I understand the difficulty of it, but what this article, part of what it's saying, I think, is like teachers don't necessarily need more time outside of their classroom learning about a concept. They need to like practice their instructional techniques in the moment, get real-time feedback, watch the coach do it, go back, them do it, the coach comment on it, and like that just takes one-on-one coaching. And so if one of the things we really need to do is help teachers feel better about and be excellent at instructional techniques, I'm not sure you can do it any other way.
I would argue there's a combination, and I think what Dave, you know, what Dylan William talks about is the use of peer coaches, because you're working on something very specific. So Shirley gave the example of one way of cold calling, and we all know that cold calling is really valuable. And yet, if you visited 50 classrooms, you'd see this happening because
No,
it's
to be
a
clear,
hard
so
habit
that's
to change.
exactly my point, is like peer, so we don't have enough coaches, we never will, using substitute time to get teachers actually
Yep.
in each other's classrooms doing that real-time coaching.
And I would say that that was happening way more before COVID. You know, it's sort of like, I feel like some of the work that teachers were doing and schools were doing got pulled back. We'd done a lot of work with Anita Archer, with Kevin Feldman, and there was a lot, because you're working on simple habits. And so getting a sub for a day and allowing peers to go in, because I'm just collecting data on how many kids you called on, and then I'm going to hand it to you at the end of the period. So it's, you know, non-threatening peer-to-peer. Yeah. So Dave's been really pushing us to try to get back to more of that work.
Yeah, I just have one comment. Of course, we need substitutes in order to buy those things to happen. But the worst thing that's happening is we're taking the best teachers out of the classroom for a half day, for another half day, for another half day. This is a major problem for the way we structure schools. There just is not a magic answer. I think it seems to me that Ben Lapine has all kinds of strategies to make the best of what we can do. And again, it's time. You know, if we could have teachers committed for 2 weeks without kids and then coach everything you know along with the kids, that'd be great. But that is just not a feasible approach. So I have to hand it to the district for all the things that we are doing. There's a lot of them, and it's you never know what's going to work the best. But going back to Melissa's initial comment, if we can triple or quadruple the effectiveness of our instruction, teacher by teacher, then we're doing all the right things.
So recently I read or heard an observation that struck me, and it was the idea that when you think about teaching, it's a performance art or a performance task. It's like, it's not like being a writer and I can just like, you can write, you can write, you can write, you can revise, you can work in your own space. It's like at a certain point as a teacher, the lights come on and you've got to be on the top of your game. And they compared that to, I mean, if you're a musician, what do you do to get better? You practice, you rehearse. If you are an athlete, it's a performance art. What do? You practice. If you are an actor in theater, what do? You practice, rehearse. Like the things that they always do to get better are that they call it practice, but what we call it in education is professional development, or we call it professional learning. We don't actually call it practice. So when you think about what practice is, I mean, it's really when you're good at something, it's something that you focus on to get even better at doing this. So I think there's a little bit of even just a language and a marketing thing that education has kind of been doing itself a disservice by labeling it as something that's maybe not totally accurate to what it should be.
Well, I guess one last thing I would just encourage us to do is like we like all industries and companies tend to like keep mostly doing what we've been doing and then like layer on and tweak. And it would just be interesting to say like how much total time and money do we spend on PD between like every teacher's time in every PD session and all the coaches and all the experts, and like if we had that much time and money and we were gonna design something from the ground up, knowing what we know now about PD, which is a lot more than we knew 20 years ago when a lot of these systems were designed, could we, you know, completely rethink how we use time and money and really like centering it and trusting it on our existing educators.
So as a segue, at the end of your slide deck, I linked a couple of articles that if this is a topic that you are interested in digging more into, I included a link to this article, The Mirage by TNTP, the New Teacher Project, which is, this came out shortly before COVID, right, 2015. So it's a really compelling, really interesting read. They look at kind of the budgeting of professional learning for the 50 largest districts in the country, and they do a deep dive, like case study following like 2 or 3 or 4 other districts. So there's this, and there's actually another like randomized controlled trial, basically talking about implementing what they were talking about in the Dylan William chapter. So if you want to read any of that, you have it available at your fingertips. But all right, well, thank you for your participation, and I will leave it up to you if you have anything else to add.
And we will get a chance, hopefully, either by the end of the school year or this summer, to review the internal staff survey results, or the statewide one from the state survey. Yeah. Right, thanks.
So I think a final thing from me, and I think I represent the board on this, is that I would like, and again, I feel strongly that the people closest to the work should be part of, designing the systems. And so I think that the board would like to see measures for next year that are included in, for goal 4. One, the diversity goal, and tying that to whichever EL makes the most sense in goal 4, for that diversity, both gender and reflection, ethnic and racial diversity. And then and I would leave it to you and your team, Dave, to figure out where it fits best and what you think is the best one. But we need a measure either from the Youth Truth or from the Oregon, the statewide one, so that we have that normed data that's something about around teachers. And yeah, and I'm going to stop there because I want you to be able to come back and say, this is the thing that we think we should be measuring, but to be able to come back with two goals and where you think they should go, or two measures and where you think they should go. Your turn. Is that, yeah. All right, well then, thank you. We're going to move into board comments. We'll start with Director Olson.
No more at this time.
Oh, just the congratulations to the winners of the last election, Kina, Melissa, Cameron, and, oh my gosh. why am I-
Amy.
Amy, gosh, I was like, I know there's someone missing, of course. Sorry, Amy, if you're listening. Anyways, congratulations to each of you.
Nothing further from me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for presenting the data, and also wanted to share that I went to the Lava Ridge Art Show last week, which is just always so cool to see all the different ways that things can be really cool. And I felt pretty good when I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, look at those mountains. Those are so cool. I love those colors. And then my daughter runs back to me and says, Bobby, you found my mountains. So that was a pretty dope moment. But yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. I have a couple. First of all, I want to thank the public for putting your trust in this board and reelecting Kina, Amy, and myself, and adding Cameron to this board of directors. I know that we take this responsibility seriously and look forward to the next 4 years. And I especially want to thank the 30% of voters. Actually, they were expecting a 28% turnout, and we had 30, which is one of the highest I can remember for a special election. And so thank you for turning out. Other work that I've been doing, we are in bargaining, so I think people may have read it in the newspaper as well, but BEA has put forward their initial proposal, and Ben Lapine School District has put forward its initial proposal. We all know that they're far away from each other, and then that's really the work that we'll be doing is figuring that out over multiple sessions, working collaboratively between the district and the associations, and I look forward to that work. Last, I have the opportunity to attend Rubbish Renewed. Expeditionary Learning has a phrase, we are crew, not passengers. And it is so alive in that event. And so I want to give a special shout out to Amy Anderson and Karen Holm, who both worked at Realms for years and years and years. Karen retired last year of all things. And Amy has become a counselor, which we need therapists in Central Oregon. So it's okay that she went on to do that. But as people that don't even work at the school, they made sure it came back, and this was the first time it had happened since the pandemic, and so it was really exciting to get to see that and see our students from across the district enter their different trash fashion, and it's just a great community event. So excited to be there. And then last, I wanted to give a quick shout out and a congratulations for winners of the 2023 Sources of Strength Award. And so that's our suicide prevention. Elena Marzoni, Sid Mucha, and Steve Furbish at Ben Tech Academy are all going to be recognized on Thursday, as well as the students in the Design Justice class at Ben Senior High School, which is led by Nat Fox. And so just really exciting to see the work that our youth are doing in our community around suicide prevention and mental health. And it's been a real strong tradition, and it is evident in the number of kids and their advisors that are being recognized. So with that, our next regular school board business meeting is scheduled for June 20th, 2023, and this meeting is now adjourned.